It's the Skeptic Show! With today's special guest stars,
Bret Weinstein, Heather Heyer, and crushing disappointment. Sup bitches? I'm reliably informed that I'm terrible at pimping my stuff. So here I am, pimping my stuff in what's hopefully an amusing way. If you want to interact with me and follow me, you can find me on Twitter at Grimasaur and at Mort_post for official announcements. Hello lovelies. This is a bit of a difficult video to make in a lot of ways, and I have deliberately been somewhat provocative in the titling and the thumbnail because I want people to watch, and that's the game you play. There is a problem, and I think it's something that opponents of the various consumer uprisings haven't really understood. There is a problem that when you are besieged, when you are attacked on all sides, you become eager, especially if the people attacking you are people you thought were allies or who shared your viewpoints. You become eager to latch onto anyone who's just willing to listen to your point of view or who agrees with you on one thing, to the point where you become somewhat blinded to the other things that go on around them. There's also a tendency when you're rejected from one group to latch on to another group, and then to become slowly shifted and even indoctrinated with that opposing group's point of view, even though it's only this one thing in your previous group that you've had problems with. This is all rather vague, isn't it? Okay, let's give a direct example, right? At the start of Gamergate, practically everyone involved, to all intents and purposes, was in the bottom left of the political compass. They were left libertarians, socially extremely liberal, socially extremely libertarian, and their objections were primarily against corruption, unfairness, censorship, those kind of things. They were rejected by the rest of their sort of natural home on the liberal left, and they found that they were agreeing with people on the right about censorship issues and so forth. But they got labelled right-wing, they got attacked as if they were right-wing. The people on the right who they'd previously seen demonised massively turned out not to all be monsters, though some certainly were, and so you saw this natural drift in that direction just because that's the kind of people they were then hanging out with and exposed to. It's not a matter of being insulted into the right, it's a matter of a shifting social circle and different social norms, and it takes a very strong or belligerent or stubborn mind to resist that, because one group, even if it's your previous group, is being horrendously horrible to you while the others are being nice and welcome and open and are willing to discuss and debate and talk about things with you. So, long and the short of it,
skip to the end.
There's a tendency amongst people to latch on to anyone who will listen to them, be sympathetic to them, welcome them, particularly when they've been rejected from their original group. This is kind of dangerous, and it can end up shifting people's point of view through no fault of their own. So I was incredibly happy to see some genuine, bona fide, unimpeachable liberals sort of join the cause through the intellectual dark web, and in particular the Weinsteins. But they've done a couple of things recently that have given me pause, and given previous past experience have made me re-examine what I think of them and who they are.
This is awful!
That's what I said.
Quick recap. The Weinsteins, the brothers, Eric and Bret, and Bret's wife, Heather Heyer, who apparently still goes by a maiden name, they were involved or peripheral to confrontations and so on at Evergreen State College a few at least a couple of years back now, where this very liberal, very Jewish professor stood up against this tradition that they had at the college that was being extended of basically banning any white people or white passing people from the campus, I believe for a week. And he stood up against this and was called racist and so on for it, even though that's pretty obviously a fairly racist event to be putting on. And this sort of seems to have shocked him and his family and his friends out of their complacency to join the ranks of other more concerned liberal academics such as Jonathan Haidt, who I talked about in my previous video.
I say, Cooper, what's going on?
Oh, it's nothing really, sir. He was just explaining.
I was passing the port from left to right.
Off you go, Cooper.
See, I've come to suspect that it's not the principle of the thing, that it's not the ideas behind all of this that really shook them out of their complacency or made it apparent to them. I think it's just the incivility of the mob, shall we say, which is unfortunate, because I was very happy to see unimpeachably liberal people join the fight against these many illiberal trends that we see amongst people who claim to be progressive. The intellectual dark web seemed promising despite some of its members. Of course, there's no such thing as unimpeachably liberal anymore. It doesn't matter what views you actually hold. What matters is what people say about you and do about you. But nonetheless, it was welcome to see them join, and I binged a whole bunch of their podcasts recently. That's when the disappointment set in, because at least on a couple of issues, there's things I don't agree with them at all on, and viewpoints that I think they hold which are as dangerous in their own way as any woke scold would hold.
You think you've got problems? What are you supposed to do if you are a manically depressed robot?
There's an episode of The Simpsons where they're contemplating moving to Boston, and Marge asks a jogger, you know, who did you vote for, and do you vaccinate your kids? Right? So they say Democrat, and of course, and she goes, liberal, but not stupid liberal. I don't think the Weinsteins go quite as far as being anti-vax, but in a recent podcast, Bret and Heather did lambast antidepressants and came up with a lot of the usual sort of ill-informed but well-meaning spiel that a lot of people come out with. Oh, you just need to exercise, you need to spend more time in nature, you need to walk, you need to do this, that, the other. To an extent, yes, and if you have lesser depression or conditional depression, something triggered by an event, yeah, that can all help, but you have to have the motivation to be able to do it, and it's not necessarily the right tool for everybody. And if your doctor thinks you should be on medication, odds are, even though there's a few bad doctors out there, you do need to be on medication. Now, I resisted being put on medication for a very long time when I was diagnosed as clinically depressed, in part because I didn't like the effect that drugs might have on my mind. Recreational drugs, I've never been a big user of those because I like to be in control and of my own mind, and I was worried about how these might affect me, and I thought maybe there was a way to get by without them, and so on and so on and so on. And so I put off using the drugs as a crutch, I suppose, for a very long time, and that was extremely dangerous and overlapped with one of my suicide attempts. So now I'm on the drugs. Sertraline, mirtazapine, vilafenol to offset some of the sleepiness and tiredness effects of the others, CBD oil to smooth out the bumps, and massive self-medication with caffeine and other energy-boosting drugs, to recreational drugs, I suppose, to try and keep going. Plus the occasional dipping of the toe into antipsychotics when the depression gets really bad. Essentially, I'm in a chemical wheelchair. But you wouldn't say to someone in a wheelchair, throw it aside, get up and walk. You're just not trying hard enough. These are some things you can do to help you walk, right? It's not a very empathetic, it's not a very sympathetic, it's not a very compassionate way to look at things. And we would never do this when it comes to physical disabilities, such as being in a wheelchair, right? But they will entertain these things when it comes to mental health issues and problems. And that's a dangerous point of view that may put some people who watch them off from taking their medication, signing up to take medication. You might need it. It might be your wheelchair. It might be what lets you get up and get about and do things. It might be the thing that stops you from tipping over that edge into suicide or self-harm. So there are arguments for alternative therapies, I guess you might say. There is a lot of evidence that these things will help, but they're not necessarily enough in and of themselves. And you may not be able to get the motivation to do these other things if you're not already helped out by your pills. So that was really disappointing and really struck very close to home, in that they were giving the kind of advice you would be more likely to see from woo peddlers and anti-vaccination people and detox diet people and stuff like that about antidepressants. And it's not the kind of evidence-led thinking you would expect to get from people like the Weinsteins, who are intimately entangled in science and academia. Bit of a crack in the facade there.
Haven't you any spirit at all? No!
The other issue they brought up, in which we massively disagree, and I don't think they're following the science, but are rather following sort of their Petit Bourgeois sensibilities, is when it comes to porn and sex work. They had a commentary on the destigmatization of sex work, and that how this was corrosive and bad for love, romance, marriage, family stability, all of the usual kind of stuff that people trot out. But there's no real evidence that pornography is harmful in any way. It doesn't appear to lead to misogyny. It seems to provide a vital societal safety valve for people who might be frustrated by their inability to form personal relationships and so forth. Could it be better? Sure. But a lot of people, like the Weinsteins, seem to have a rather outdated and outmoded view of what the adult industry is. Their concept is frozen in the sort of 1980s cocaine-fueled big hair VHS, high production value stuff, whereas today it's much more likely to be a couple or a self-managed individual producing adult content for others entirely of their own volition, without any coercion other than monetary circumstance, but that goes for any work. And the idea that it's corrosive to society in this way is bullshit. It's the exact same frame of mind that woke skulls have when they try to ban things that they believe are harmful, even though there's no evidence of it. Why they try to influence media so much, and why it's just as ridiculous when people on the far right accuse the media of being brainwashing and moulding minds and so on. Most people just aren't that malleable. Provided you have a diversity of content, of intellectual content, of type of content, then you're just not going to end up with a homogenous point of view. People will pick and choose. People will encounter things outside of their own thought bubble. There won't be this brainwashing effect. That it has to be near total control, like North Korea or something, to really have that kind of effect. I work with people in the adult industry. I've known sex workers, ex-sex workers, adult workers, ex-adult workers. These are some of the best, no bullshit people I've ever had the pleasure to work with. They're just open in a way that most people aren't. People in the industry talk about civilians as being people outside the industry, and I think there's something to that. There's something unique to the experience, and the landscape of the adult industry is so different these days to what people like the Weinsteins seem to think it is. I just think they don't understand it, and there's no real evidence that it causes any sort of harm. So why come down so strongly against it? Is it again Petit Bourgeois sensibilities, or a slightly more old school feminism, which is anti this thing, right? And they even objected to being called sex negative or prudish. Yeah, it is prudish, and there's a difference between practicing tantric sex at home in your bedroom and keeping a copy of the Joy of Sex under your mattress and living a truly libertine life. It doesn't affect you that other people live in this way, so why is it your concern? And again, this is no different to the sex negative woke scolds in their own way. So this is disappointing, very disappointing.
Strange object imaged in the Imperial Vortex.
I'm not saying don't listen to them, don't watch them, don't read the articles that they put out. A lot of what they say, a lot of what they do, I believe has a lot of value to it, and nobody's perfect, and we can't be getting into the same kind of purity spirals that the woke scolds or the alt-right get into. Just, it's once bitten, twice shy. We've got to be careful about who our allies are. We've not got to be so grateful to anyone who shows us the slightest bit of kindness that we allow ourselves to be exploited, or that we don't call those allies out when they are doing something or saying something that we think is wrong. So I just want to enter a cautionary note to everybody. Don't tie your flag to the mast of any particular set of people or podcast or channel or personality. Certainly don't do it to me. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But don't do it to anybody. Keep your own mind. Remember to be conscious, I guess, is the thing here. And that goes back to hate and his elephant and rider. You want to empower your rider and disempower your elephant. So your conscious mind, you need to train yourself to think consciously about your decisions and what people are saying and doing and who they are as a whole, as a totality, and treat every aspect individually. So I think they're still well worth listening to, watching. They talk to interesting people about interesting things in a slightly more academic setting than Joe Rogan, perhaps. Just take them with a pinch of salt. Take everyone with a pinch of salt. And it's just disappointing and unfortunate that the Weinsteins are such sensibility-led petty bourgeois middle-class types. It's, disappointing. Not what we ordered. Zang. It's been called misogynistic, racist, a hate group, reactionary. It's been blamed for Trump, for keeping women out of games and technology. None of this is true. If you want the real story, then you need to buy Inside Gamergate.